Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I got a new topic to go over. So today we're going to do the topic video that I would usually do on Sundays. That's this video here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole Andrew Schulz versus Kendrick Lamar thing. Andrew Schulz making jokes about black women. Kendrick Lamar responding back in a line that he recorded on his recent album GNX. Andrew Schulz, he heard the album, heard the line, and he responded back to Kendrick Lamar in a very controversial way that got a lot of people's attention. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that, the negatives to it, the positives, just my personal opinion about just comedy in general. Dark comedy, edgy comedy, the whole cancel culture, making racist jokes, and how they become worldwide conversations about like how they offend some people, but then other people, they look at it as jokes, so then they just laugh about it. Just all about that, basically. I'm gonna try to fit all of that into one video. Before I start this video, I'm gonna talk a little bit about my music, the new song Cafe Fiend, out on all platforms. The next track that I'm dropping, this one's called Rare Lobster. This one is set for December 24th. Check that track out. Plenty more music and content to come up for the future, all year long, next year. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe, follow, add me everywhere else, SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, like, comment. That will also help me a whole lot. A little bit of background, because this comedian is pretty famous worldwide, but a lot of you guys may still not know who he is. So Andrew Schulz, this is a New York comedian that's been doing it for the last like 10 years. He has a podcast called Flagrant, where he talks about different topics around the world. Akash Singh, one of his best friends growing up, he's also a comedian himself. The two, they run this podcast Flagrant with two other dudes that I think they're all like friends. They all grew up with each other. They basically talk about everything. It's usually funny because Akash and Andrew Schulz are both comedians, so some topics are serious, but most of the time they're trying to crack jokes out of whatever topic they're talking about, just because they're comedians. Andrew Schulz is the type of comedian to make edgy, darker jokes that's poking fun at anybody and anything, no matter if it's about race, stereotypes, if it's about subjects that's sort of hard to talk about. They'll try to find something that's like pretty offensive and sort of hard to talk about and try to make a joke out of it, because that's his style. He likes to make edgy, darker style jokes. He sort of reminds me of South Park in a lot of ways. Like, he could be a writer for South Park. He's basically like the comedian version of the cartoon South Park. Very similar style of jokes. So like with his podcast Flagrant, one of the episodes, he had two British podcasters, James and Fuhad. Their podcast is called Shits and Gigs. They're two British podcasters that Andrew Schulz invited onto his podcast. They were talking about basically just dating women, all races. I think it started off with that. Then the conversation led to dating black women. And Andrew Schulz, he made a comment basically saying it's like a different like life to date a black woman compared to like any other race, because of the stereotypes that he kept bringing up. And he was sort of taking those stereotypes and trying to make jokes out of it to make the podcast funnier. It's what everybody's used to, because like I said earlier, it's Andrew Schulz like style of comedy. He likes to make offensive jokes. It's his whole style. He's very similar to South Park, like I was saying. So he started cracking those type of jokes. James and Fuhad, they're sort of laughing with Andrew Schulz and everyone else on the podcast, Akash, all the other guys. It's meant to be a funny podcast, so they didn't really have any choice but to laugh along with what Andrew Schulz was saying. But after the podcast, they made an apology on their own podcast, and Andrew Schulz didn't end up apologizing for what he said. And he's basically telling everybody to stay upset because he'll never change his style of comedy just because other people are getting offended. He doesn't care about the cancel culture. He doesn't think that he could get canceled just because of his type of audience. For how long they've been rooting for Andrew Schulz and watching his comedy, his fan base is pretty strong. It's almost like a cult fan base. For that reason, he doesn't think that he can get canceled. So the way he will tell his jokes, he'll say what he's saying without any like concern or worry about getting canceled, or without caring about other people's feelings. He doesn't care about being offensive. He's just gonna tell his jokes the way it is. It's just his style. He likes being real with his jokes, and he doesn't care about how offended other people get, because it's more about getting the laughs out of the people that are about that style, rather than caring about everybody's opinion at the same time. At the end of the day, he is just a comedian and they are just jokes. But a lot of people got offended by what he was saying on that podcast. Like I said, the James and Fuhad guy, the British podcasters, they apologized on their own podcast about the whole situation. Andrew Schulz and Akash, they didn't apologize. They ended up making a podcast basically doing the opposite of that. And a lot of people are shocked because of it. So there's a lot of people outside going against what Andrew Schulz is saying, including Kendrick Lamar, who responded in one of his songs on GNX. That's what made Andrew Schultz's head turn, sort of make a response after listening to that song. So the Kendrick Lamar song, I think it's on Whacked Out Murals, on that song specifically, basically attacking Andrew Schulz for what he said. The line was basically, "Don't let a white comedian talk about black women." That's basically what the line was. Andrew Schulz, obviously, he's also a hip-hop fan too. He's tapped in with the whole Drake and Kendrick beef also. Like, while the beef was going on, him and his crew been talking about the whole situation. So between Drake and Kendrick Lamar, he listens to the album, he immediately gets offended by what Kendrick Lamar says about him. The next podcast that he makes, he brings up the situation and basically declares war against Kendrick Lamar. Even though that probably means nothing to Kendrick himself. He's the biggest rapper in the world right now. This guy is too busy to even care about a response from Andrew Schulz. He probably doesn't even know about it yet. But basically saying that he would fight Kendrick Lamar, and he was, in his own words, if he was able to 1v1 with Kendrick Lamar, just him against Andrew Schulz, he would destroy Kendrick Lamar. He said that he would make love to Kendrick Lamar. I think it's just his like white boy joking style. What he really means is that he would beat up Kendrick Lamar and Kendrick Lamar would do nothing about it if they were to 1v1 with each other. He understands that Kendrick Lamar has the whole West Coast behind him. If it was an actual beef, Andrew Schulz understands that Kendrick Lamar has way too much backup to like actually want to fight Kendrick Lamar, but he's like basically saying if it was a 1v1, maybe because of how short Kendrick Lamar is, that's the joke that he's sort of making. But at the same time, Kendrick Lamar should be like the last person you want to have any beef with or you want to talk smack to, because we all know what happened to Drake. Comedians can think of some funny things to say. If anything, comedians are pretty creative. They can probably make diss tracks themselves. But I mean, you saw what happened to Drake. I don't think Schulz wants to go back and forth with a guy like Kendrick Lamar, even though he's a comedian and he can make some edgy disses towards Kendrick. I definitely believe that because Andrew Schulz is a pretty good comedian. Even with all the offensive stuff that he said, like, he is doing pretty well. He is a pretty successful comedian that goes worldwide, performs in front of everyone. His podcast has almost 2 million subscribers on it. He has a big following. In terms of like a battle, obviously Andrew Schulz stands no chance, but he's mainly talking about a physical 1v1 fight between him and Kendrick Lamar. That's what he was saying. I mean, at least I hope that's what he meant. His comedic style really reminds me of South Park a whole lot. Even myself, like, I grew up listening to a lot of rap music. Obviously, you guys know that. A lot of like 90s hip hop. Growing up listening to like Lil Wayne, a lot of like Nas, Jay-Z, a lot of East Coast rap. And a lot of it will have misogyny, offensive lyrics towards not just black women, but women. And I used to listen to a lot of that growing up. Even till this day, I still listen to that stuff. There's a lot of comedy shows, cartoons, movies that I grew up watching. A lot of stand-up comedy as well that would involve a lot of jokes that Andrew Schulz would make that were like super offensive. If those same jokes were said today, those comedians would probably get canceled or people would attempt to try to cancel them. I grew up listening and watching all of those shows. Like, I get what Andrew Schulz is saying as a response to what Kendrick Lamar is saying. Andrew Schulz basically saying, how could you say what you're saying on your album towards me when you've made songs with a number of rappers that made lyrics just as offensive, if not even more offensive, than anything Andrew Schulz has ever said about anybody or like any race. At the same time, just like I was saying with the whole South Park thing, Andrew Schulz, his edgy, darker jokes, he tries to attack everybody. It's not just one single race. I've heard Andrew Schulz jokes before. I've seen some of his stand-up. He attacks everybody. You know what I mean? He's like South Park. Family Guy is another great example. He'll come up with jokes that attacks everybody, not just races, but just like everything in life. You know what I mean? They're really just trying to get people to laugh with material from all kinds of different things, you know what I mean? So that the joke stays as creative as possible. Like most of these comedians, TV show writers and movie writers, they probably would lose their talent if they stayed focused on one subject of like stereotypes or like making fun of a certain group or people. They make fun of everybody, including white people. These are white writers. Andrew Schulz, white guy, he's made racist jokes towards white people before many times. It's an interesting thing, man. I'm on both sides with this, you know, mostly on going against the jokes towards black women, just because out of all races, when it comes to women, it is usually black women. When it comes to like these comedians, also rappers, when they're making their like lines, writing their songs, writing their jokes, I definitely can see that. You see the response from a lot of people, the backlash that Andrew Schulz is receiving. A lot of like black women are making videos about the situation, talking about the shits and gigs guys, James and Fuhad and Andrew Schulz. The fact that the British comedians, they just sat there and they didn't really like respond, or they never really like went against what Andrew Schulz was saying at the time. They were sort of like laughing with him, and a lot of black women, they were making videos about the whole situation, giving their own opinion about it. The British podcasters were sort of like laughing with Andrew Schulz, and then they made their apology after the fact. So they were talking about that. I'm on their side with that, you know what I mean? Like, and as well as Kendrick Lamar, you shouldn't really make jokes like that. At the same time, they are jokes and they're meant to make people laugh. So it's quite the situation, right? It's hard to just take one side with a topic like this. I mean, like, all jokes aren't for everybody. If anything, if you get offended easily by jokes and by rap music, you should just like stay away from it. Because the one thing, these two industries are very powerful: comedy and rap music. I'll just say music in general. You can find stereotypical lyrics and offensive lyrics in other genres outside of rap music. It's everywhere. It's mostly rap music. I'll definitely agree with that, but you could definitely find it in other genres. Comedians like Andrew Schulz, they're not going anywhere, right? The industry is just too powerful, and at the end of the day, they are just jokes. Best to just like laugh and move on, or if you get offended by it, just stay away from it. Like I keep saying, man, it's too much of a powerful fan base for them to get canceled, and the industry is too powerful. And it really does look like cancel culture is sort of dying down, especially for comedians and artists with like a slightly smaller fan base. They're going to be a little bit more loyal to the artist and the comedian compared to an artist or a comedian that's like worldwide famous and more on the mainstream commercial side, where they're doing stadiums and they're going like around the world. Those artists and comedians, I can see them getting canceled before the Andrew Schulz and the Akashas, because they're more like, I wouldn't say underground, but they have like a smaller fan base that's more on the cult side. They just know that this is how they've been for like their entire lives. This is just how they are, so they're used to it. At the end of the day, they are just words. They're jokes. It's music. People say all kinds of things all the time. Even just like walking through the street, you run into somebody and maybe they say something racist to you. Like, I've seen and heard so much different dark, racist, sexist stuff in my life, man. Jokes in music, just in like TV shows that aren't even meant to be like comedic. For me, myself, being a comedy fan and a rap fan, it's hard for me to go fully against what these comedians and rappers do. At the same time, I definitely understand why a lot of people will get upset and offended by what Andrew Schulz said. This is a tough topic. Let me know what you guys think about this whole situation between Andrew Schulz and Kendrick Lamar. I kind of wonder how serious this can go, especially with what Andrew Schulz said to Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar is the biggest rapper in the world right now, alongside Drake. So I don't really see him responding back to Andrew Schulz, who is like a much smaller celebrity compared to Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar might be too busy to respond back. Comment, let me know your opinion. Like the video. Definitely plenty more music afterwards into the new year. I appreciate you guys watching, and that's all I got for this one, man. I'm out. Peace.